To God be the glory.
The most significant question facing all of mankind is that of the existence of God. We welcome you now to the Warren-Flew debate. Does God exist? Dr. Warren affirms, I know that God does exist.
Dr. Flew, gentlemen moderators, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that I'm certainly pleased to be back to reply to the speech to which you just heard. And before I give attention to the question which he answered that I just started at the end of my last speech, I must say that while Dr. Flew was in the affirmative, he spent all of his time in the negative. And now tonight that he's in the negative, he spends all but about 2 minutes of his time in the affirmative. And while I do not know exactly their customs in England, Dr. Flew, I assure you that's very peculiar for us in Tennessee and Texas. Now, I want to begin again with question number one. He said, the question was, true or false, it is possible for God to be infinite in some of his attributes and finite in others. For example, he can be infinite in love, but finite in justice. He answered that is true. I suggested a moment ago that Dr. Flew and I then are talking about different gods. The God I'm defending in this debate is infinite in all of his attributes. I know there are all kinds of things that men refer to when they use the word God. But I'm not talking about a God who can be infinite in love, but not infinite in justice. Now you can understand that since an atheist has really only one argument, all the other things he may say are peripheral to that. He really has only one argument, which Dr. Flew has not really made. I wish you would even yet really buck up to it and make it. The one argument you've got, Dr. Flew, is evil. Now, he cannot then admit that God is infinite in justice because what? That would mean that God would be right in punishing men who are guilty of sin. So he then says, oh, yes, he can be infinite in love, but he cannot be infinite in justice. Secondly, what would be involved in God's being infinite in love? What is his answer? He's as silent as the stars. Not one single word did he say about it. What indeed is involved, Dr. Flew? I challenge you to answer that question. What is involved in God's being infinite in love? Secondly, what if it were in contradistinction to what you said about his being finite in justice? What would be involved in God's being infinite in justice? What if he were infinite in justice? Then what would he do? What would be involved in it? Question number 4. True or false? It is not possible that the justice of God would entail any punishment for sin. And lo and behold, to my utter consternation and surprise, he says it is false. In other words, he's admitting that God can punish. When his whole argument seems to be that if God does punish, this proves he's not a God of love. But that isn't all of it. Let's note the next one. In number 5, true or false? It is possible that this infinite justice of God might entail at least 1 minute of punishment when this life is over. Now note, it might entail at least 1 minute of punishment. And not be out of harmony. God would not be self-contradictory in his basic concept. What about 2 minutes, Dr. Flew? What about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, an hour, a day, a year, a month, a year, 100 years, 1,000,000 years? Where do you stop? Would 1,000,000,000 years be long enough? Could God punish a man 1,000,000,000 years and still be just and loving? You can see that he's given up, just as he has in each night. He has shown his inability to answer these questions in harmony with the atheistic position and the implications which follow from it. And he himself is on record as saying when a man cannot do that, then it's clear that he holds a false position. Number 6, I know what the punishment for sin should be by intuition, by deduction from the concept of God, by deduction from the concept of sin, by deduction from some empirical fact, from the combination of the concept of God and some empirical fact or something else. And which one of those do you suppose he answers? Not a single one. Now, I've said here from something else. If there was something else, I didn't list all the boxes. I said maybe there's something else I haven't named. If so, you name it. He left it completely blank. My friends, when men have the truth, they do not handle questions in this fashion. Number 7, true or false? All men have done at least some things they know they ought not to have done. Now, Dr. Flew's been on both sides of the question as to whether morality is subjective or objective. He confesses there is real objective wrong, but then he winds up arguing in a way that it simply depends upon the function of the human mind. He's admitted before there were human beings, there was no value in the world, and therefore, given that answer, value can be nothing more than a function of the human mind, nothing more than likes or dislikes. Like you don't like spinach and you like ice cream. You don't like adultery and you don't like murder, but you do like kindness. But it's merely a matter of your own opinion. Now, that's what he's doing with this particular thing. Now, he's recognizing that all men know they have done things they ought not to have done, and just as admitted on earlier passages in connection with the work of the Nazis and the charges against them and their condemnation, he has admitted there is a higher law which transcends the provincial and the transient, and that means it transcends what each individual thinks. It even transcends what a whole nation thinks. It even transcends what a group of nations thinks. There is a higher law above that which can be only the law of God. And yet he says, now here all men know they've done something they ought not to have done. That, in effect, is again an admission of defeat, which he has done over and over and over in this discussion. Number 8. Philosophy offers nothing by way of salvation from this feeling of guilt which results from knowing that one has done what he ought not to have done, and he answers true. Now, after answering that everybody knows he's done something he ought not to have done, and therefore that everybody has guilt feelings, and he says philosophy is the only thing I have to offer, he says philosophy doesn't have any answer. Now, how much more could you give up? Just try to think about how you could give up any more than this learned man from our fellow country that we all love and admire has done. Number 9, list below at 1 the attribute of God which contradicts the attribute of God which you list at 2. Now, under 1, he lists justice and goodness. And then in number 2, he lists sustaining hell. Now, why he lists that is because he holds that God is finite in justice. That is not the God we're defending. That is not the God of Christian theism. The supreme personal being, creator of the world, transcendent of the world, infinite in all attributes. Dr. Flu's talking about somebody else's God. Now, Dr. Flu come up and talk about the God we're talking about in this debate, and then answer that question, which two of the attributes or characteristics of God contradict one another. When you recognize that God is not only infinite in love, but infinite in justice, then you see there is no contradiction in the matter of the sustaining of hell. Now then, I want to look at his speech. He gave about 2 minutes, if I timed him correctly, at the very most, to replying to my speech, and spent the rest of the time in doing what would have been closer to what he ought to have done last evening than, so far as I can recall, anything he did do. He said that he's really having trouble. He confesses that he's having trouble deciding whether he should be an atheist or an agnostic. But I pointed out to you that in the discussion with Dr. Plantinga in California, he really chided. He really came down strong on it, as I recall. He indicated that any agnostic is simply not willing to face up to the facts. If you're with atheists, you sort of lean in that direction. If you're with theists, you lean in that direction. He indicated that agnostics are somewhat cowardly, is what I could get out of it, and that they ought to come on and recognize that the evidence demands that they can know that God does not exist. But now notice this significant matter. Dr. Flu, you signed an atheistic proposition. Now, if later on you'd like to discuss with somebody and sign an agnostic proposition, well, that would be perfectly all right with me. But in this proposition, in this debate, you signed an atheistic proposition. You didn't say that no one can know whether God exists. You said, I, Anthony G. and Flu, know that God does not exist. Now, that simply doesn't fit with what you've been doing here. Now, notice this, my friends. We've had quite a bit to say about the Germans, the Nazis, and their treatment of the Jews. I don't believe there's a man living but what has an abhorrence for what happened there. Someone says, oh, but you're appealing to emotion. No, I'm not. I'm appealing to facts. Every argument I'm making in this debate appeals to facts, empirical facts. Now, here is the fact that these people put little children in boxcars coated with quicklime so that they would not only die, but die agonizingly over a period of days. Dr. Flu has admitted that they were guilty of objective moral wrong. But now note he comes back when I give the argument to which he gave about a snap of the finger recognition. He said the reason why I need give no more attention is because you can't really draw a clear line between the human and the non-human. Now, friends, that's one thing you've got to believe to be an atheist. Well, then it turns out the Nazis were right. If you can't tell the difference between a human and a non-human, what was wrong with what they did? Dr. Flew, you couldn't prove then the people they executed in those horrible, terrible ways they did were really human, can you? You don't really know the difference between a human and a non-human. The truth of the matter is, like the great philosopher, great in philosophic circles, that Professor Hume seems to admire so well, but that he does not really follow, Professor Hume did not believe his own philosophy, and he made it clear that he didn't. But he said nature forces us to believe, whatever that means. Dr. Flew doesn't believe this. He doesn't believe you can't tell the difference between a human and a non-human. He believes, as you and I, those Nazis were guilty of monstrous, heinous crimes because they were guilty of murdering and torturing little children. A whole nation set out to exterminate it in the most awful situation imagined. Now that brings us again to the law of excluded middle. Why this man will on the one hand admit the law of excluded middle, on the other hand turn right around and deny it, I'm beyond the ability to explain. He admitted last evening, after quite a bit of sparring for 2 evenings, that the law of excluded middle is true. That for every precisely stated proposition, that every precisely stated proposition is either true or false. Now then, this proposition that every object either has the property of being human or it does not is a precisely stated proposition. Now that proposition is either true or false. Every object in this world is either human or it's not human. Now the fact that somebody may have some difficulty in some particular case of deciding, let's say, you may say, here's 2 animals. We say, well, is this a dog or is this a cat? Well, you say, well, I can't really decide. But I do know one thing. I know that this one right here is either a dog or it's not a dog. And I know that that one is either a cat or it's not a cat, even if I can't decide which one is the case in this case. Now, Dr. Flew, you know that every object in this world is either human or non-human, and all that you've had to say about that is absolutely worthless. Now then, let me have my chart again with the diagram of my argument on the board. I pointed out to you that this argument is a valid argument. Dr. Flew admits it. Now, to admit that an argument is valid is to admit that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Now, he tried to rid himself of this argument by his reference to the difficulty of deciding what is human and what isn't. I've shown that he's not successful in that. Not only that, but he chooses to ignore the fact, as I have pointed out repeatedly, that on the first night he admitted that no human being has ever evolved from any ape or any other non-human being. He admits that no human being has been born of an ape, no human being has ever been transformed from an ape. That's the only 2 conceivable ways it could have happened. And therefore, it is simply clear that no human being on this earth owes its ultimate origin to evolution, but rather it must owe it to God. Note the argument makes clear that we are here. Human beings owe their origin to either creation or evolution. It is my conviction that in this great land of ours, state universities by and large are not really giving our young people a fair shot at the real information on this matter. Creation or evolution. And they cannot prove evolution. This man, as good as they have to represent them, has admitted what is crucial to the whole argument and has given up completely. Now, before I respond to the other matters in his speech, which are basically about explanation, I want to ask Dr. Flew to answer these questions on explanation. If you'll jot them down, Dr. Flew, in fact, I will leave this sheet right here for you, and you can answer them as you come. You can just come here and follow from this sheet. True or false, any explanation of the existence of phenomena must be a scientific hypothesis. Secondly, all explanations of facts are of the type of scientific hypothesis. Number 3, a rational explanation and a scientific explanation are exactly equivalent. Number 4, a non-scientific explanation does not explain anything. Now I want to give my second argument, the design argument. Dr. Flew has already admitted in question number 9 of the second night regarding the Mars probe that if we could find a message carved on a rock on Mars, and I want to see charts number 42J on the screen. That if we could find a rock on Mars by this Viking device, which had a picture of a king and his coat of arms and a message expressing gratitude by the people for the wonderful work he had done, he has admitted that this would constitute a proof that intelligent life was on Mars. Now, this is an admission that the basic thrust of the argument of empirical fact, from empirical fact to knowledge of the existence of something that you have not observed, is a valid procedure. Now, note the significance of that. This means that he has, in fact, recognized the validity of the basic thrust of natural theology. All of this palaver about explanation is simply beside the point. He needs to come up as a negative speaker and recognize what he has already admitted in regard to these matters. Now, note in his effort last evening, when he introduced, before it had ever been introduced in the debate, when he should have been giving affirmative arguments, he gave a negative argument in reply to the design argument. And he said, after all, we can take care of all of these matters, such as the eye and the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine gland system in the human body, because these things grow, but things like automobiles are made. But Dr. Flew seems to have forgotten that he has already admitted that no human being came by transformation, and that no human being came by birth from an ape or any other non-human being. Therefore, it's clear that human beings could have originated only by miraculous power. And so you see, the first human pair, Adam and Eve, were made or created by Almighty God. They were made, and the law, the power of reproduction, were put in their body, and every one of us who's lived from then until now owes his existence to that power of reproduction put in the human body. The atheist has absolutely no way he can explain that makes any sense whatever. Now let us notice in an argument that I've introduced very briefly, and I want you to have chart number 42A1 on the screen, in which we see the passage of air alongside the passage of blood in the alveoli in our lungs. Now, in the lungs, we have a gaseous interchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide. The reason why you see this interchange, if you'll notice on the screen as he points it out to you, the arrow going from the oxygen in the air to the oxygen in the blood is because of a greater tension of pressure in the air passage, of the particles of oxygen in the air passage, than in the oxygen particles in the blood. And the reason why the carbon dioxide passes through the wall of the blood into the air passage is because of the opposite of that, a greater pressure of the carbon dioxide particles in the blood than there is in the air. Now, we cannot live longer than 5 minutes without this. Physicians tell us that if you have been in a situation in which your brain has been deprived or this process has been stopped for more than 5 minutes, you are considered dead. Now then, evolution requires, so evolutionists tell us, long periods of time for these complex changes to occur. Now, Dr. Flew, you have the obligation of explaining how this occurred in a 5-minute period. How did it evolve in that period of time? Now I'm going to give it in a formulated, precise, logical way. Here's the first premise. If the gaseous interchanges, that is, of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the respiratory system of human being, possess such properties or involve such things as to make clear that such interchanges were not brought into being by any part of or the totality of dead matter, then the respiratory system of the human being in which these interchanges occur must have been brought into being by the Creator who transcends the universe, that is, God. The second premise, the gaseous interchanges in the respiratory system of a human being do possess such properties as to make clear that such interchanges were not brought into being by any part or part of or the totality of dead matter. Therefore, the respiratory system of the human being must have been brought into being by the power of God Almighty.
The fact that I have had difficulty in deciding something doesn't mean that I haven't decided it. It just means that I say that I have had difficulty in making this decision for reasons I've tried to give before. The fact that it's possible to have cases in which the human shades into the non-human, the clearly human at one end of a scale of development, the clearly non-human at the other end of the scale, does not in any way involve that there are not many, many, many cases in which there is not the slightest difficulty about saying either that something is human or that it is not. It is not the case that if you believe that there was a continuous development from the higher animals to man, you are committed to saying that you can't tell that Mrs. Wilkinson next door is human. All that you are saying is that there could be cases shading off from the unambiguously human end of the scale to an unambiguously non-human end of the scale, and that in the past such cases actually did exist. Third one about infinite injustice and infinite in love. The reason why I don't offer any account of what these phrases mean is that they are not phrases that I have any inclination to use. If I did have an inclination to use them, I would endeavor to try to give some meaning to them. On the other hand, it does seem to me clear that those who do use them must intend by this, whatever else they intend, that the being thus described should be at least minimally just, and at least minimally loving. Whatever else they mean, they can mean that. This being so, I take it that there's some possibility of arguing about infinity in justice and infinity in love, drawing some conclusions from what people say about this, even if you are far from clear about the whole of what people mean in this case. Next, about its being possible for God to be infinite in some of his attributes and finite in others. For example, he can be infinite in love but finite in justice. Well, of course, it may very well be that the term God, as Dr. Warren and others define it, specifies these two requirements together, and that they also believe that there is a being who has both these characteristics together, of course. Nevertheless, the reason why I answer that it seems to me possible for God to be infinite in some of his attributes and finite in others, for example, he can be infinite in love but finite in justice, is that, though I have the difficulty already explained about what infinite in these characteristics mean, I take it that both are intended to imply at least minimal lovingness and at least minimal justice. It does, and it seems to me that it would be perfectly consistent for someone to assert their concept of God that it had some combination of these characteristics which Dr. Warren's does not have. Hence the reason for saying that. Now, about if one says that some punishment might be justified, there's really no stopping point between a minute and infinity. Well, if the difference between a minute and infinity is as unimportant as all that, why are people so mad keen that the hated sinners should be punished for all eternity? If there is no substantial and significant difference between a small degree of something and an unlimited degree, you cannot, if you're wanting to say, oh, well, you know, if you've allowed a minute, there's no stopping place, it's just as good to allow infinity, then okay, what is eternity between friends? If this doesn't matter, could Dr. Warren and his God settle for a minute? No, of course he couldn't, because he agrees that there is an enormous difference here. So, what with perhaps uncharacteristic degree of vehemence I'm trying to bring out here is that differences of degree can be enormously important. That almost all the humanly important differences are differences of degree. And that once you've seen this, you can't go on saying that, well, the difference between age and youth, sanity and insanity, riches and poverty, a free society and one in which, as in imperial Germany, everything that is not forbidden is compulsory, are differences of degree, so they don't matter. You've allowed that there should be some laws against doing some things, so there's no stopping point before you allow that there should be laws forbidding absolutely everything you can think of, and then committees established to think of something else you might forbid. No, really. The serious point is that differences of degree can matter, and that by allowing that some modest punishment, some punishment commensurate with the offence might be appropriate, you're therefore saying, oh, well, then everything might be all right. It's just a difference of degree. This really won't do at all. The argument to design again. What have I admitted? Indeed, what have I not admitted, but asserted in saying that one can reasonably argue and rightly argue from the presence of an automobile and our knowledge of the world that this must have been designed and put together somewhere, that this is an artifact. What I have allowed here is simply that we can learn, we do learn, growing up and in the experience of our lives, we learn that certain sorts of cunning things are in fact made by people, that they do not in fact drop from the sky. Automobiles don't drop from the sky, neither do watches and so on. Equally well, we have also learnt from our experience of the world that there are some other remarkable things, even more remarkable perhaps, that, at least to all ordinary observation, just growed and were not designed. Well, now, there's also, I think, a series of further homework questions. Any explanation of the existence of phenomena must be a scientific hypothesis. There would be quite a lot of explanations that people wouldn't dignify with the name of science, I suppose. When Kojak offers an explanation as to what the hoods were doing, would one call it a scientific explanation? Presumably not. So it would appear that this is false. All explanations of facts are of the type of scientific hypothesis. I suppose so, but of the type of perhaps some rather extensible notion. A rational explanation and a scientific explanation are exactly equivalent. Surely not. No. One can offer explanations of points of logic and so on that people would not call scientific. A non-scientific explanation does not explain anything. Supposing I explained why my daughter was cross. Scientific explanation? Surely not. And yet, it could very well be the reason why she was hopping mad. If a proposition is logically necessary, then it's a purely formal one, and this does not explain anything. Well, a logically necessary truth can be at least part of a system of explanation that explains some factual matter. It can also be part of a proof which explains, I suppose, some matter in geometry and the like. I suppose that's true. Let's have a look at the ones I was set before I came. By the way, I think I should say why I haven't been exercising my right under the terms of the debate to ask questions in return is not indolence or anything like that. It just doesn't seem to me that in this sort of area one can help ask any very helpful questions that will help, well, that will get the discussion moving, because to get the discussion moving, one requires more context, more explanation of what people are about than can be offered in this sort of multiple choice examination. But on this occasion, I will try to go through all of these, at least to either to answer them or to explain what reasons led me not to answer. It's not possible that the justice of God could entail any punishment for sin. Why I said that was false is that it was certainly not clear to me that there could not be just punishments. I'm hesitant about this one. And the reason for hesitation is that it seems to me so difficult to see how God could be in an appropriate position to be the punisher. No doubt it would be possible for a person justly to deserve some punishment, but as God will have been an accessory before and during the fact in the behavior of his creatures, it doesn't seem to me that it would really be proper to speak of him doing the punishment justly. So, after hesitation, I put down false. Possible the infinite justice of God might entail at least 1 minute of punishment when this life is over. Same background to that. And I think I've already made what is the crucial point, that really we're not going to get very far towards justifying what needs to be justified by providing a hesitant justification for some moderate punishment. I mean, would anyone say that just because they thought it was entirely proper for the federal government to prescribe certain punishments for murder, therefore it would be entirely all right to have a federal law under which people were tortured indefinitely as long as they could be kept alive? One wouldn't go from saying it's proper to have some system of punishments to saying that it's proper, or there's no stopping place between some and absolutely anything you'd like. I know what the punishment for sin should be by various options here. Well, of course, it's very difficult for me, except showing, great goodwill, wanting to be helpful, to give any answers about the punishment for sin, because sin, as I well know, is defined in terms of God's will. And of course, what I'm thinking about when one talks about sin, that I know this, is about another aspect, which appears to be an aspect of most cases which people who use the notion of sin would use this notion of, namely that most, though not all, sins are also moral offenses. So actually, when I try to answer a question about punishment for sin, I'm thinking of the moral offenses which might be thought by some to be at the same time sins. All men have done at least some things they know they ought not to have done. Don't have any difficulty with that one. Yes, indeed. You don't have to be one of the two presidential candidates to be aware of having yourself done things that you ought not to have done. Though perhaps some people are aware that it's entirely possible to say, and consistent to say, that you've done things that you ought not to have done, that other people have, that you can sympathize with the other people who've done it, and you're very hesitant to throw first stones and all that, while still insisting that it was wrong for the other people to have done them. Seems to me just a little intervention in your presidential election campaign with a little bit of moral philosophy. It seems to me it was quite unnecessary to say that you don't blame, reproach, or whatnot people for doing something you say is wrong. I think you might blame or reproach, but do it in a very sympathetic way. Back away from your internal affairs private affairs, we might even say, in this context, away from that, about what philosophy offers. Well, yes, indeed. I mean, but besides being paid as a philosopher, I'm a human being, and it's also the case that the fact that I'm paid to know about philosophy and to do philosophy doesn't involve that I'm paid to know about philosophy and to know nothing else or to do nothing else. So I may very well answer questions that Dr. Warren puts to me here, not, so to speak, with my philosophical hat on, but with another hat on. Philosophy offers nothing by way of salvation from this feeling of guilt which results from knowing what one has done, one has done what he ought not to have done. I put this one down as true for two reasons. One is that it doesn't seem to me that philosophy constitutes any sort of program for salvation anyway. I also, I must say, had a little hesitation about this. I don't like, in this context, to talk about a feeling of guilt. Surely the point, and I'm sure it's Dr. Warren's point, is that it offers salvation from the actual guilt, not from the feeling of guilt. Someone may have a feeling of guilt which was not justified, and they may also have guilt without feeling guilty about it. And surely what we're arguing about, or what one would want to argue about in this sort of context, is about actual guilt and actual salvation and so on. Well, I think I've done all my homework, or else given an explanation of why I haven't felt able to do it. So I may go back later to this business of incongruously being affirmative when I should be negative and negative where I should be affirmative. I take Dr. Warren's point about that, and I think he's probably right about that. I don't know what there is to be done about it, though, other than to try as and when I can to meet the points which he raises, and to try as and when I can to say other useful and relevant things, which is what I've been trying to do all the time as best I can. Well, I think I'm just going to stop at that point.
The churches of Christ are not only committed to the existence of God, but are also committed to the restoration of New Testament Christianity. We invite you to visit our services. Any questions or comments concerning this debate are welcome.